A very good morning to my dear students. I hope that you are doing well and keeping safe at your homes. Anyway, we have almost completed the 4 units from your course book, and today we are moving with the 5th unit. So, I would like to engage the first chapter in the 5th unit entitled as Travelling Through Time, written by H.G. Wells. So, unit 5 is actually consisting of science fiction. Okay, what do you mean by fiction? Yeah, fiction means something imaginary, fictitious character or something like that we used to say. So, science fiction means imaginary. So, here is actually you have fictitious works on science. Okay. So, we are actually going with the first one included in the 5th unit. So, travelling through time. So, this is actually a story which follows a Victorian scientist who claims that he has invented a device that enables him to travel through time. So, this is actually the content, or this is actually the net summary of this story. Anyway, let us go with the preface portion. Anyway, I am going to read the preface portion. So, you have to be very keen and alert, and at the same time you have to read along with me. Okay, all of you please take page number 108 and look at the preface portion of the story entitled as Travelling Through Time, written by H.G. Wells. Here I am going to read the preface portion. Here is an extract from H.G. Wells' science fiction classic, The Time Machine. So, this chapter entitled as Travelling Through Time is actually a small extract taken from the fictitious work, or taken from the science fiction classic, The Time Machine. The main character, the time traveler, is a scientist and inventor in England who has been able to construct a machine that will allow him to travel through time. So, as I said right now, or as I mentioned right now, this is all about a person, or the main character in this story is the time traveler. So, this story is all about this character who is a scientist and an inventor in England who has been able to construct a machine that will allow him to travel through time. So, this is actually the content of this story. Anyway, let us move on with the first part of the story to know what is actually going to be discussed in the beginning portion. Okay, here I am going to read the first portion. So, please listen and read along with me. The time traveler's grey eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burned brightly as we sat around listening to him after a very satisfying dinner. For some time now, said the time traveler, I have been playing with an idea that struck me some time ago, to create a machine that could enable me to travel through time. So, the story opens on a dinner party at the house of an eminent scientist called as the time traveler, whose eyes were bright and blinked with full of interest and energy, just opposite to his usual pale face, and was explaining to his assembled guests, including the narrator, that the principles of science and maths that support or facilitate the possibility of traveling across time just as one would travel across space. So, in short, we could easily say that the first part is all about the time traveler's utterances, that how he invented a machine that would definitely allow him to travel through time. Okay. To travel through time, scoffed the very young man. Scoffed, the meaning is given here, spoke in a rude, unkind way. To travel through time, scoffed the very young man. What an imagination you have! A machine, repeated the time traveler, that shall travel indifferently in any direction of space and time as the driver determines. So, his Gus, being a doctor, a psychologist and a journalist, upper class British men, they actually greeted his findings or remark with skepticism. That means, see, the doctor, the psychologist and the journalist, they were considered as upper class British men. So, these upper class British men always looked his findings or always looked his remark with skepticism. It seemed to them that it was very difficult to believe his words. Okay. Philby laughed out loud. But I have experimental verification, said the time traveler. Experimental verification? Cried I. You are going to verify that? Yes, I intend to, he responded confidently. The time traveler, after the excitement from the psychologist, underlined and emphasized the fact that he was really speaking about a machine that could travel indifferently in any direction as the driver determined. Then Philby started mocking with a loud laugh. Yeah, when the time traveler mentioned that, yeah, that machine could travel indifferently in any direction as the driver determined, then Philby started mocking with a loud laugh. Then time traveler remarked that he had the experimental verification with him. Experimental verification again mocked the narrator and asked that was he going to verify that. Then with much confidence the time traveler politely responded that yes, he was intended to do it. Okay. Let us see your experiment then, said the psychologist, though it's all humbug, you know. Then the psychologist remarked that whether they could check was it true or not. Was it something like a humbug, means something dishonest that is intended to trick people. Okay. So, then the psychologist remarked that anyway, let us come, they could check whether it was true or not, or it was something like a humbug or something like something which people did in order to trick people. Okay. The time traveler smiled round at us. Then he walked slowly out of the room, and we heard his slippers shuffling down the long passage to his laboratory. So, to demonstrate the validity of his ideas, the time traveler walked out of the room and slowly moved to his laboratory. The psychologist looked at us. I wonder what he has got. Then the psychologist soon mentioned that he wondered what he had got. Okay, some silly trick or other, said the medical man. Then the medical man mentioned that it might be some silly trick or something like that. Okay. Then listen, the time traveler came back and the thing he held in his hand was a glittering metallic object, scarcely larger than a small clock and very delicate made. There was ivory in it and some transparent crystalline substance. Soon he came back with a bright metallic object, just larger than a small clock, which was made in a delicate manner. It was made up of the compounds of ivory and crystalline substances. Okay, now listen, we are actually moving on to the next page. Please turn over the page and take page number 109. Then listen, here I am going to read the next part. Please do listen and read along with me. He took one of the small tables that were scattered about the room and set it in front of the fire. On this table he placed the device. Then he drew up a chair and sat down. The only other object on the table was a small shaded lamp, the bright light of which fell full upon the model. There were also perhaps a dozen candles about in brass candlesticks upon the mantel, so that the room was brilliantly illuminated. We were all on the alert. It didn't seem possible that he would be able to play a trick on us in any way. Then what he did was, he took a scattered table and placed it in front of the fire, and he placed the device in the table. Then he sat down there. There was a small shaded lamp also, and it was placed in a way as the bright light of it fell full upon the model. Okay, there were many candles on the shelf above the fireplace to lit the room illuminated, and they were in much alert, and it didn't seem as if he wouldn't be able to play a trick on them in any way. So in that way, they were all turned as skeptical about the experiment that the time traveler was going to do or going to show. Okay, now listen. The time traveler looked at us and then at the device. Well, said the psychologist, this little affair, said the time traveler, is only a model. It's my plan for a mission to travel through time. We looked at one another in astonishment. The time traveler's eyes were switching between us and the device, and he stated that, well, this was only a model, and added that this was his plan for a mission that could help him to travel through time. They looked at one another in astonishment. Now listen. He went on, pointing with his finger. Here is one little white lever, and here is another. When I press this lever, the machine will glide into the future, and when I press the other, I will travel back into the past. Then he explained its specifications, and he showed the two levers and said that when one lever was being pressed, the machine would glide into the future, and when the other got pressed, it would travel back into past. The medical man got up out of his chair and peered into the thing. It's beautifully made, he said. So soon the medical man soon got up out of his chair and remarked that it was beautifully made. It took 2 years to make, responded the time traveler. Then the time traveler remarked his dedicated and continuous effort or attempts in making it and responded that it took 2 years to complete this project. Okay, then listen. When all of us had crowded around to take a close look at the machine, he said, "Presently I am going to press the lever and off the machine will go. It will vanish, pass into future time and disappear. Have a good look at the thing. Look at the table too and satisfy yourself there is no trickery." While everyone among them were standing close to the machine, he said that he was going to press the lever and the machine would go. It would vanish into future and disappear. So he asked them to have a close observation on that and make sure that he was not doing any trickery to make them fool. Because every time they were actually suspicious about him, about his experiment, or every time they were actually skeptical in their view. Okay, there was a minute's pause. Then the time traveler put forth his finger towards the lever. "No," he said suddenly, "lend me your hand." He for a while waited for them, or he gave time for them to check it. After a minute's pause, he stretched his finger towards the lever. "No," he said suddenly, "lend me your hand." Then he stopped and asked them to give their finger. It's only for making them sure that he was not at all playing any trick to make them fool. Okay. Soon he turned to, and now listen, and turning to the psychologist, he took that individual's hand in his own and told him to put out his forefinger. So that it was the psychologist himself who sent forth the model time machine on its fantastic voyage. We all saw the lever turn. I am absolutely certain there was no trickery. There was a breath of wind and the lamp flame jumped. One of the candles on the mantle was blown out and the little machine suddenly swung around, became indistinct, was seen as a ghost for a second, perhaps as an eddy of faintly glittering brass and ivory, and it was gone, vanished. Save for the lamp, the table was bare. Then he turned to the psychologist and told him to put out his forefinger so that he himself could send the model time machine on its fantastic voyage. Then he said, "See, we all saw that the lever turned," and he added that there was nothing trickery on that. As he turned the lever on, there occurred a sudden breath of wind and the lamp flame jumped out, and as a result one of the candles blown out and the little machine started fluctuating, turned to a position that couldn't be seen clearly, was almost like a ghost, and soon it was vanished. Soon the table was bare except the lamp on it. So there was only the lamp on the table, and what happened to the device, or what happened to the machine? The machine started fluctuating and turned to a position that couldn't be seen clearly, just like a ghost or something like that. In that way it vanished away. Okay. Now this is all about this page. Now we are moving on to the third page. So please turn over the page and take page number 110. Now listen, I am going to read. Everyone was silent for a minute. So then there occurred a deep silence. The psychologist recovered from his stupor and suddenly looked under the table. At that, the time traveler laughed cheerfully. "Well, what do you think of my invention?" he said. We stared at each other. So after the considerable silence, psychologist recovered from his shock and looked under the table, and soon the time traveler laughed carefully and asked what did he think of his invention. Okay. Then after that, both of them stared at each other. Look here, said the medical man. Are you in earnest about this? Do you seriously believe that the machine has travelled into time? Then the medical man asked that whether he was serious about this or not, and asked whether he seriously believed that the machine had travelled into time. Certainly, said the time traveller. What is more, I have a big machine nearly finished in there. He indicated the laboratory. And when that's put together, I meant to have a journey on my own account. Then the time traveller replied that certainly he thought like that. And pointing to the laboratory, he said that he had a big mission to be finished. And when that was also being completed, he would have a journey on his own account. You mean to say that the machine has travelled into the future? Said Philby. Into the future or the past, I don't know. I don't for certain know which. We sat and stared at the vacant table for a minute or so. Would you like to see the time machine itself? Asked the time traveller. Then Philby asked whether that machine had travelled into the future. Then the time traveller replied that he didn't know it for certain, that whether it was into the future or into the past. Then they sat and stared at the vacant table. Then the time traveller asked them whether they would like to see the machine or not. Now listen, he led the way down the long drafty corridor to his laboratory. I remember vividly how we all followed him, puzzled and incredulous, and how there in the laboratory we beheld a larger edition of the little mechanism which we had seen vanish from before our eyes. Then he led them to the laboratory. They were as confused and not in a position to believe it while they were actually going to the laboratory. And they saw in the laboratory that a larger edition of the little mechanism which they had seen vanish from before their eyes. So while they were actually going to the laboratory, they were quite surprised, or they were quite shocked to see the larger edition of the little mechanism there. And their shock was quite doubled when they had seen it vanish from before their eyes. Okay, now listen. Parts were of nickel, parts of ivory, parts had certainly been filed or sewn out of rock crystal. The thing was generally complete, but the twisted crystalline bars lay unfinished upon the bench beside some sheets of drawings, and I took one up for a better look at it. Quartz it seemed to be. So they could see parts of nickel, ivory, rock crystalline. Generally it was completed, but some twisted crystalline bars laid unfinished there. And it seemed to be as if like a hard mineral, often in crystal form. Okay. Did you really build this yourself? The psychologist demanded. The time traveler pointed. I did. Here, this saddle-like thing is where the time traveler will sit when he sets out on his journey through time. Then the psychologist wondered and asked whether he did it by himself or not. He said, yes. And pointing out to the saddle-like thing, he remarked that this was the part where the time traveler would sit when he set out on his journey through time. Okay. Look here, said the medical man, are you perfectly serious, or this is a trick like that ghost you showed us last Christmas? Then the medical man again asked, were you serious, man, or was it like that of the previous trick played on us on that last Christmas? Yes, said Philby. Don't tell us that you actually intend to use this fantastic machine. Then Philby said, don't tell them that he actually intended to use this fantastic machine. Okay. Then we are actually moving on to the last portion. So please turn over the page and take page number 111. Indeed, said the time traveler, holding the lamp aloft. Upon that very mission, I intend to explore time. Is that plain? I was never more serious in my life. None of us quite knew how to take it. So the time traveler said that he never used to be serious and remarked that he intended to explore time. So when he uttered this comment, the rest of them couldn't believe it at all. So in that way, the story ends here. So as I said, this is actually a small extract taken from H.G. Wells' science fiction classic entitled as The Time Machine. And as I said, it is all about a story that follows a Victorian scientist who claims that he has invented a device that enables him to travel through time. So as we finished this chapter, it was also understood to us that it was all about a person who wished to travel through time with the help of a little machine he made by himself. So this is all about the chapter. I hope that you understood everything I discussed today. Anyway, it's the time to wind up. Anyway, if you have any doubt, all those doubts will be clarified in the Zoom interactive session. So before going to wind up, let me to remind you one thing, that see, being a science fiction, we have a plenty of new words as described in this particular chapter. So you have to write down all those difficult words together with their meanings in your notebook. That is compulsory. Then only you will get a good vocabulary, and then only you will be able to understand the story in a good manner, and also you will get those new words and their meanings. Okay. Anyway, hope that we can wind up at this point. Anyway, thank you and have a nice day.